He didn't leave in the middle of an argument. He didn't pack a suitcase in anger. And he didn't say goodbye like someone who thought he'd never return. He left like a man who believed life would pause without him. His wife was pregnant when he walked away. Not newly pregnant, the kind where the doctor visits had started to feel routine, the kind where the baby had already kicked, the kind where reality had already settled in. But reality has a way of sounding different to men who haven't learned how to listen. He told himself it wasn't abandonment. He called it space, time, clarity. And she let him believe that, because sometimes silence is the only dignity a woman has left. They weren't strangers when they married. They had history, years of inside jokes, shared meals, long drives where the radio stayed off because conversation felt easier than music. He used to reach for her hand without thinking. She used to lean into his shoulder like it was the safest place in the world. This wasn't a broken marriage, it was a tired one. And tired marriages don't collapse suddenly. They fade quietly. You know the kind. Conversations get shorter, questions stop being asked, silence becomes normal. So normal that no one remembers when it started. He worked longer hours, or at least he said he did. She learned not to interrupt him when he came home, not because he told her to, but because disappointment had taught her faster than words ever could. Still, she believed marriage meant endurance, and endurance meant staying. When she told him she was pregnant, he smiled. The right smile, the expected smile. He hugged her, said all the things a husband is supposed to say. But something inside him stiffened. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was weight. Pregnancy has a way of making men face themselves, and not all men like what they see. She noticed the change before he did. He listened less, stayed distracted longer. His phone became more interesting than her doctor appointments. She stopped asking him to come along, not because she didn't want him there, but because disappointment during pregnancy feels heavier than disappointment anywhere else. Here's something no one tells you about emotionally neglected wives. They don't argue forever. They try, they explain, they ask, but eventually they grow quiet. She learned to translate his moods by the sound of his keys in the door. She could tell what kind of evening it would be before he even spoke, and pregnancy makes silence louder. The baby kicked at night. She placed his hand on her stomach once. He smiled again, that same polite smile, and then he rolled over. That was the night she realized she was alone, even though he was still there. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been lonelier with someone than you ever were without them? Most people don't answer that question right away because the answer tells you more about your marriage than you want to admit. He didn't think of himself as cruel. Cruel men yell. Cruel men cheat openly. He just withdrew. And withdrawal is easy to justify. She's strong. She'll be fine. I just need time to think. But pregnancy doesn't wait for clarity. Bills don't pause. Appointments don't reschedule themselves. And fear doesn't disappear just because a husband looks overwhelmed. She cried alone, quietly, so he wouldn't feel guilty. That's the thing about good women. They protect men from consequences longer than they should. He chose a morning when the house was quiet. No arguments, no drama. He said he needed space. She nodded, not because she agreed, but because she was too tired to beg. He kissed her forehead like a promise he didn't plan to keep. And then he walked out. No slammed door, no final speech, just absence. Silence filled the house differently after that. It wasn't tense anymore. It was permanent. She folded baby clothes alone, sat through appointments alone, learned how to breathe through panic without calling him. And here's the part people rarely talk about. She didn't hate him. She mourned him. There's a difference. Hate requires energy. Grief just sits with you. You know how people say, everything happens for a reason. She didn't believe that yet. Right then, everything just happened, and none of it felt reasonable. Years moved forward, whether he was ready or not. The baby grew, life adjusted. She learned independence the hard way, the kind that doesn't feel empowering at first. She stopped waiting for apologies that never came. And slowly, something changed. Not forgiveness, clarity. Because while she was building a life without him, he was discovering something of his own, something loneliness doesn't teach right away. And by the time he realized what he'd walked away from, the door he assumed would always be open had quietly closed. And that's where our story turns. Because leaving is easy. But returning, that's where the truth waits. At first, freedom felt like relief. No quiet tension in the house. No questions he wasn't ready to answer. No reminders of responsibility growing day by day. He told himself he needed this. Men often confuse relief with peace. They feel similar in the beginning. He slept longer, stayed out later, let the television talk while he avoided his own thoughts. And when people asked about his wife, he kept the answers vague. We're just taking space. It's complicated. She understands. Most lies sound reasonable when no one challenges them. He tried to rebuild himself without addressing what he'd broken. New routines, new distractions, even new people. But starting over doesn't erase what's unfinished. It just delays the reckoning. He avoided places that reminded him of her, avoided songs they used to love, avoided the thought of a child who would be learning to walk without him. Not because he didn't care, but because caring required accountability, and accountability feels heavy to men who already feel overwhelmed. Let me ask you something else. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to leave, but how hard it is to sit with the reasons you left? That's where most people stumble. For her, time was structured. Feedings, schedules, small victories that only mothers notice. She learned how strong she was by necessity, not choice. For him, time was loose. Days blurred, weeks slipped by. He told himself he'd call soon. He always had a reason not to. And the longer he waited, the harder it felt to explain himself. Silence became mutual, but not equal. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in moments. Seeing a father buckle a child into a car seat, hearing a baby cry in the grocery store, watching a mother soothe a toddler with practiced ease. Those moments lingered longer than he expected. He told himself it was normal, that everyone feels this way sometimes. But something had shifted. The freedom he wanted began to feel empty. And emptiness doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up as restlessness. He even tried convincing himself that silence was peaceful. But silence is only peaceful when it's chosen. Otherwise, it's just loneliness with better manners. While he was learning how to live alone, she was learning how to live fully. Not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily. She stopped expecting anything from him, and expectation, once released, is incredibly freeing. She stopped explaining her pain to people who didn't know how to listen. And slowly, her silence changed. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was closure in progress. He dated. Nothing serious. Nothing meaningful. Every connection felt shallow compared to what he'd walked away from, and that confused him. He thought leaving would make things clearer. Instead, it made everything quieter. He began to realize something uncomfortable. He didn't miss the arguments. He didn't miss the responsibilities. He missed being needed. And being needed is something you don't appreciate until no one is waiting for you anymore. It came through someone else, a mutual acquaintance, a passing comment. She's doing well. The child's growing fast. He nodded, smiled, but the words stayed with him. Growing fast. That meant time had passed, more than he'd allowed himself to count. That night, he couldn't sleep, because for the first time, he realized the child had a life without him, and life doesn't pause for absence. Here's the truth most people avoid. Children don't remember promises, they remember presence, and absence leaves a shape. Regret doesn't arrive as pain, it arrives as awareness. Awareness that choices made in comfort often create consequences felt later. He began replaying moments. The night she placed his hand on her stomach, the quiet mornings, the way she didn't argue when he left. He had mistaken her silence for acceptance, but silence is not agreement. It's often exhaustion. He told himself she'd understand eventually, that time would soften everything. But time hadn't softened her, it had strengthened her. And that realization unsettled him, because strength built without you is not easily surrendered back to you. You ever notice how people say, "If you ever need me, I'm here," until you actually need them? That's when you learn who meant it. The idea crept in quietly. What if he reached out? What if enough time had passed? What if she was still waiting? Men often believe love waits indefinitely, but love isn't a bench. It's a moving thing, and if you don't walk alongside it, it keeps going. He wasn't afraid she'd yell, he was afraid she wouldn't. Anger still means engagement. Silence means the door might already be closed, and that thought terrified him. So he did something he hadn't done in years. He looked back. Not casually, not briefly. He really looked. And what he saw was a life that had grown without his permission, a woman who had changed, a child who might not know his name, and for the first time since he walked away, he wondered if returning was even an option anymore. Because regret doesn't ask politely, it waits until the cost is high enough to notice. And in the next chapter, he finally reaches out. But timing has a way of answering before people do. Pride and regret sit on opposite sides of it. He rehearsed what he would say. "I've been thinking about you. I should have handled things differently. I hope you're doing well." All sentences that sound sincere until you realize how much time has passed behind them. Years have a way of exposing empty words. Have you ever noticed how apologies feel urgent only after the consequences arrive? That's not coincidence. That's human nature catching up. He didn't call. Calling felt too intimate, too demanding. So he typed instead. Short, careful, neutral enough to protect his pride. "Hey, I hope you and the baby are doing well. I've been meaning to reach out." He read it 3 times, then sent it, and immediately wished he hadn't. Silence answered first. Minutes passed, then hours. He checked his phone more than he'd like to admit, not because he expected forgiveness, but because he expected something. Anger, questions, accusations. Anything would have felt better than nothing. Silence, after all, was what he'd left her with. She saw the message almost immediately. She didn't open it right away, not because she was afraid, but because she no longer felt rushed by his needs. That alone told her how far she'd come. She read it once, then again, and something inside her settled. Not anger, not sadness, recognition. This was the moment she used to imagine, back when nights were long and hope was fragile. But now it felt different. She didn't wonder why he reached out. She already knew. Time had done what distance couldn't. She thought about all the moments he'd missed. First steps, first words, quiet triumphs no one applauds. And she realized something quietly profound. She had survived his absence, and survival changes what you're willing to reopen. You know how some people come back with a key only to realize the locks have been changed? That's not revenge, that's growth. While she sat calmly, he spiraled. He imagined explanations, second chances, late-night conversations filled with understanding. Men often believe showing up later still counts as showing up, but time doesn't operate on intentions, it operates on actions. She didn't reply that day, or the next, and with each passing hour, the truth became harder for him to ignore. He had waited years. She had waited long enough. Let me ask you something honestly. When someone finally reaches out after years of silence, are they really thinking about you? Or are they trying to quiet something inside themselves? That question matters more than people realize. He told himself to be patient. After all, he'd been gone a long time. But patience feels different when you're the one waiting. He remembered how calm she was when he left, how she didn't chase him down the driveway, didn't demand answers. At the time, he'd felt relieved. Now he understood why she hadn't fought. She had already been grieving. She had routines now, boundaries, a life that didn't depend on someone choosing her. She wasn't closed off. She was complete, and completion doesn't rush to reopen old chapters. There's a difference between "I miss you" and "I miss who you were when I needed you." Most people don't know which one they're feeling. He sent another text, longer this time, more honest. He apologized carefully, took some responsibility vaguely, but even sincerity can feel hollow when it arrives too late. He didn't realize it yet, but he was speaking from nostalgia, while she was standing in reality. She didn't feel obligated to respond. That was new. Once upon a time, she would have explained herself. Now she understood something powerful. Not every message deserves a reply. Sometimes silence isn't avoidance, it's resolution. For the first time, he felt it. The shift. He was no longer the one choosing distance. Distance had chosen him, and that realization cut deeper than anger ever could. Days passed. Still nothing. And in that silence, a truth began to form. Not all returns are welcomed. Not all apologies are accepted. And not all love stories circle back. Some end quietly, long before one person realizes it's over. Because next, he doesn't just want to talk, he wants to see them. And that request changes everything. He stared at the screen again. This time, the message wasn't about checking in. It wasn't about apologies or explanations. It was about presence. "Could we talk in person? I'd really like to see you." And the child. He hesitated before sending it, because this message carried weight he couldn't pretend away. Then he sent it, and waited. She read it slowly, not because it was confusing, but because it confirmed what she already knew. This wasn't about conversation. This was about access. Seeing them meant stepping back into a space she had worked hard to protect. She didn't feel anger rise. She felt clarity. Sometimes the hardest part of healing is realizing you're healed enough to say no. She replied, not immediately, not emotionally, just clearly. "I don't think that's a good idea." No long explanation, no reopening old wounds, just a boundary. He read the message 3 times, then a fourth. He wasn't angry. He was stunned. He hadn't prepared for refusal. In his mind, seeing the child was a right, something delayed, not denied. He didn't understand yet. Rights aren't preserved by absence. You know how some people think family is a lifetime membership, even after they stop paying the dues? Life doesn't work that way. He typed, deleted, typed again. He wanted to say it wasn't fair, that he deserved a chance. But fairness loses meaning when responsibility is missing. And for the first time, he recognized something unsettling. She wasn't trying to punish him. She was protecting what she built. She remembered the night he left, the quiet way he closed the door, the way the house felt afterward. She remembered holding her stomach and whispering promises to someone not yet born. Promises she kept. And that memory anchored her. He tried again. I understand. I just want to explain myself. But explanations feel different when the listener no longer needs them. Let me ask you something. How many explanations does it take before you realize the action was the answer? She took a deep breath. Then she replied, I've made peace with the past. I don't want to revisit it. That sentence carried years inside it. Peace doesn't argue. It closes the door gently. That's when it hit him. Not all endings are loud. Some are settled. And settled endings don't reopen easily. He felt something he hadn't felt when he left. Finality. People say closure comes from conversation. Sometimes it comes from silence. He saw them once, from across a park. He recognized her immediately, not because she looked the same, but because of the way she stood, grounded, certain. The child laughed, and the sound stayed with him, because it wasn't meant for him. He didn't approach, he didn't wave, he just watched. And in that moment, regret took shape. Not as guilt, as understanding. He thought leaving would give him freedom, but standing there, unseen, he realized the truth. He hadn't escaped responsibility. He had postponed grief. And now, the life he walked away from no longer had room for him. Because next, he must decide whether to accept the truth or fight a door that was never meant to open again. He didn't sleep well after that day, not because of guilt alone, but because certainty had replaced hope. Hope is noisy. Certainty is quiet, and quiet leaves room for reflection. He replayed the moment again and again, how she didn't look around, how the child never noticed him. That's when it finally settled in. He wasn't missing from their life. He was absent from the beginning. There's a difference between being forgotten and never being known. That realization changes a man. For years, he had told himself a story, that he left because he wasn't ready, that space would help him become better, that time would soften the consequences. But time didn't soften anything. It clarified. He saw now that walking away wasn't confusion. It was a decision. And decisions, even quiet ones, carry weight. People say, if it's meant to be, it'll come back, as if life guarantees another opportunity. It doesn't. This story isn't about villains. It's about timing, about silence mistaken for strength, about love mistaken for patience, about the belief that doors wait forever. They don't. Some doors close softly, so softly you don't notice until you try to walk back through them. One evening, he sat alone, no distractions, no noise, and for the first time, he didn't fight the truth. He had walked away during the moment he was most needed, and life had moved forward without him. That wasn't cruelty, that was consequence. Somewhere else, a woman tucked a child to bed. She turned off the light, and the house, once heavy with silence, felt full. If there's one lesson here, it's this. Silence can protect you for a while, but it also records everything, and one day, it plays it all back. Life didn't punish him loudly. There was no dramatic downfall, no public shame, just distance. Distance between what he imagined his life would be and what it quietly became. That's often how regret works. It doesn't announce itself as pain. It shows up as contrast. Have you ever noticed that life rarely yells at us? It whispers. And if we ignore it long enough, it lets silence do the teaching. He became more thoughtful, more patient. He learned how to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. The kind of man he should have been earlier. But growth has no rewind button, and wisdom doesn't negotiate with time. He carried the lesson quietly, not bitter, not angry, just aware. People say, "At least you learned something." But learning isn't the same as getting a second chance. She never called herself strong. Strong people rarely do. She simply adapted. She learned how to build a life without waiting for permission. She taught a child what safety feels like. And safety, real safety, comes from consistency, not promises. What if the strongest thing someone ever did was stop waiting for you? That thought sits heavy. The child grew up knowing love without confusion, knowing presence without conditions. That doesn't mean questions never came. It just means answers didn't come with resentment. And that matters. Some nights he wondered what his voice would have sounded like during bedtime stories, what advice he would have given. Those thoughts didn't torment him, they humbled him. Because humility isn't about shame, it's about acceptance. You ever look back and think, if I knew then what I know now? That sentence has no ending, because it doesn't change the past, it only explains it. Closure didn't come from conversation, it came from understanding that not every chapter includes reconciliation. Some chapters exist to teach us how deeply actions matter. This story isn't just about pregnancy or marriage or walking away. It's about timing, about recognizing when silence is a warning, not peace, about understanding that love requires presence when it's inconvenient, not later when it's comfortable. If you're listening to this and thinking of someone you've been distant from, don't wait for the right moment. The right moment is almost always earlier than we think. He didn't become a villain. He became a lesson. And sometimes that's the role life assigns when growth comes too late. A man sitting alone, not lonely, just thoughtful. A woman closing a door at night, not in anger, but in peace. A child asleep, never knowing how close regret once stood. Some people leave believing they can return whenever they're ready. But love doesn't wait forever, and silence remembers everything. If this story touched something in you, please tell me in the comments what city or state you're listening from. If you'd like me to continue sharing stories like this, you can support the channel with super thanks. It truly helps. On your screen, you'll see 2 more life stories I deeply recommend. Please subscribe so we can keep having these necessary conversations. Thank you for listening. With love and respect.